and audiences joining us online. My name's Kate Griffin, and I'm International Programme Director at the British Centre for Literary Translation here in Norwich. This morning, we'll be exploring new fiction by three wonderful writers, Carrie Young, James Scudamore, and Kirsty Logan. We'll start with short readings by each of the writers, questions to each writer, and then we'll move into a general discussion. I will introduce each writer, but very briefly, because if you want to know more about them, you can read about them in your brochure or on the website. We'll start with Carrie Young. Carrie was born in Kingston, Jamaica, to a Chinese father and a mother of mixed Chinese-African heritage. She came to England in 1965 and lives in Leicestershire. Her first novel, Pow, was shortlisted for the Costa First Novel Award and the Commonwealth Book Prize, and tells the story of a Chinese immigrant to Jamaica who becomes a gangland boss and whose fortunes reflect the political history of Jamaica. Carrie's second novel, Gloria, tells the story of Pow's long-term lover and highlights the complexity of Jamaican society. And I'm very much looking forward to Carrie's third novel, which will cover a similar period, but from the point of view of Pow's wife, Faye. This morning, Carrie will be reading from the first two novels, Pow and Gloria. Carrie.
All three books are linked over a similar time period, but each story is a standalone story that you can read independent of the other books. So that you get sometimes the same instances from different points of view. So what I'm going to do this morning is that I'm going to do just that. I'm going to tell you the same story from Pow's point of view and from Gloria's point of view. Okay? But we first meet Gloria, and although it's the second book, it doesn't matter which order. We first meet Gloria, the 16-year-old Gloria, and her younger sister Marcia, and this is how we meet them. I grab a piece of wood and I hit him, and I hit him, and I hit him. All I can think of, all I can hear is the dull thud, like when you bash open a ripe watermelon and the juice splash all over you. And then I hear Marcia screaming as she's trying to get out from under him. She's shoving him off of her, but my arm is still moving because all I'm thinking about is how he done it to me, and how his hands so rough everywhere he holding me down. And how the Kaya mattress stick me in the back as I lay there, staring up at the rusty old corrugated zinc roof he got on this shack. And how it's so hot in here, and how the smell of him, the thick, sour sweat of him, make my stomach turn, and it make me want to heave. But I just lay there like a piece of old board until it was done. This is what I'm thinking while my arm is swinging and swinging, till Marcia grabbed me and we run out of his stinking pit into the air and the rain. We just run past a hole in the ground where we burn in the wood to make the coal, into the trees, through the mango and the breadfruit, and the banana and the pear, and we just tearing past everything. We cut through the cane field, and we run through the bush past branches that catch your arm and roots that catch your foot, down, till we make it to the river. And that is when I realized I still got the piece of wood in my hand. So I smash it. I find a big rock, and I smash it and pull it and tear it, till there was nothing left but twigs and splinters. And I throw everything into the river. And then I just jump in after them because the blood is all over me, with the rain making it run like its own little river, rolling down my face and all over my hands and soaking into my frock. And that is when it stopped raining. So Gloria and the sister run off to Kingston, and a few things happen. So that 70 years later, she has to go to Pow. So it's 1945 now. She has to go to Pow to ask for his help. So this is Pow. Me and the boys was sitting in the shop, talking about how good business was and how we need to hire up some help. And that is when she show up. She just appeared in the doorway like she come out of nowhere. She was standing there with the sun shining on her, showing off this hat. Well, it was more like a kind of turban like the Indians wear, only it looked 10 times better than that. Or maybe it just looked 10 times better on her. She got on this blue dress that looked like they must have sewed it up with her already inside it. It's so tight. And a pair of high heel shoes I never before seen the like of. I almost feel embarrassed that she come here and find me like this, sitting on an empty orange crate in my vest with the beer bottle in my hand. So we all three of us quickly jump up and we ask her how we can help. And what she wants is for me to go visit her sister in the hospital so I can see what some white sailor boy do to her. What did he do to her? Hampton asked. He beat her. He beat her so bad I can hardly recognize her, my own sister. So what he beat her for? Just go see her, that is all I'm asking of you. And then she looked directly at me and she said, can you do that? And I just say yes, even though I don't know why. And then she said, thank you, and hand me the piece of paper with the details of the hospital where the sister at. The sister named Marcia Campbell. And then she said to me, Marcia will tell you how you can contact me if you decide you want to help. And she turned and she walked out to the shop. No sooner than she gone, Hampton start, the sister's a whore, man. How you know that? Sure, man. What do you think she doing with the sailor boy? They're most likely arguing over money. And this one, she probably a whore as well, even though she looks so good and I bet she tastes fine. But she's a whore, man, sure. So what you saying, if she a whore, it don't matter if she get beat? It come with the territory. Like, should I get vexed if somebody try my patience? No, man, it come with the territory. I asked Judge Finley, you think she just a whore, so it don't matter? Well, I think she is a whore. I think most likely Hampton right. But if this white boy really beat her like the sister said, then you have to ask yourself what kind of man this is. And if it's okay for a white man to beat a Jamaican woman and it passed just like that. Sure, man, white men been beating Jamaican women for 300 years. This is true, I said to Hampton, but this is the first time anybody come ask us to go do something about it. Okay. So he does. Pau sends Hampton to sort it out. And the thing is that Gloria and her friends are in the business that Pau and his friends suspect. But the reason that his sister's been beaten is not the reason that Pau thinks is the reason. Because Gloria, as well as running that business, is also running a money lending business, an illegal money lending business with Chinese shop owner, supermarket owner, Henry Wong. So this is Gloria's version. Henry said the situation bad out of hand and that we need to go get, not that I need him to come tell me that. He said we need to go get some proper help and that there is this man down in Chinatown that do this sort of thing for all the shops and such down there. That we got to go talk to him and get some protection. This not the same as protecting the grocery store from all the thieving and burning that's going on down there. This is a different thing entirely. You think he going to care about us? You got suggestion? You know somebody make you safe? I can't say nothing because all I can think about is how Marcia laid in a hospital, smashed up like a rag doll and fighting to get the breath back into her body. You go see. The Chinaman? Yes, Gloria, you go see. He see you, he be kind. Take pity, give good price. But I know Henry not just worried about the money. He fretful for us as well. So I said, okay, I will go. But that is not enough for Henry. You wear blue dress and head wrap. I am not going down to West Street, dress up in a get-up like that. You mad? You think I'm going to get off the bus in King Street and walk down Barry Street just like that? I wouldn't even make it 2 blocks to Aaron Street before some man would be grabbing a piece of me and dragging me into the gutter. Never mind how many women would be cutting their eye at me because they take one look and decide they know my business. No, man, it's dangerous. Henry so fixed on the blue dress, he decided to take a buggy and go with me down there. He said, the driver going to drop me near outside the shop and he going to wait around the corner till I finish. The day we go down there is hot, and the dress so tight, I was boiling up like a live lobster inside it. I couldn't hardly move without oozing 6 ounces of water from every pore. But that is what Henry wants, and that is what I do. When I get there, I just stand up in the doorway, and I stare at the 3 of them sitting there with a beer bottle in their hand. The one Henry sent me to see was wearing some shabby old cotton pants and a vest that he should have had good manners to put a shirt on over. How Henry think this man can do anything to help us, I don't know. It seems he can't even dress himself decent. They jump up when they see me and brush themselves down, and I look straight at him, and I say, Young Pao, I know it is him because he's a Chinaman, and the other 2 black Africans. What can we do for you, miss? This is the big muscle one that decided to talk to me. So I look at the Chinaman direct and I say, I understand you will sometimes offer a hand of help. What kind of help would that be? Help with a U.S. sailor following an incident with my sister that put her in the hospital. So what he beat her for, the muscle man asked? Just go see, I said to the Chinaman, that is all I'm asking of you. And then I look directly at him, firm and steady, and I say, can you do that? And he said, yes. So I give him a piece of paper for the hospital details and tell him if he wants to help, Marcia will let him know how to get hold of me. And I turn around and I walk out. Henry waiting in the buggy around the corner and take me straight back to East Kingston, where I got stripped down and take a shower and put on a fresh, cool house coat. 3 days later, Trevor come running into the house like a bat out of hell, full of excitement and jubilation. Beryl said to him, what fire catch your ass, boy? The sailor took a licking. Good and proper man. Trevor flicking his wrists and clicking his fingers to make the sound and lash of leather and skin. You serious? Yeah, man. So bad, they have to put him in the naval hospital. The boy well and truly mash up.
Thanks very much, Kerry. I'd like to start by asking what was the inspiration for your novels? I mean, were they based on your own family history at all? And whether you had to do any research? I mean, there's a very strong sense of Jamaica as a place and its history in the novels. Did you spend much time there when you were writing the books?
I did spend some time there. The funny thing was that when my sister read the draft of Powell, she said that she kept reading it thinking it was the history of our family, but didn't recognize it. So she felt a bit confused by that. But because although it is partly based on that, because obviously I grew up in Jamaica in those early years, really the book started as being inspired by Jamaica. So there is that sense of place. And I started off wanting to write something about Jamaica, wanting to write something historical about Jamaica and about the social and political changes in Jamaica, because all the books follow 1938 up to the early 80s. So it's that period from from the first political parties, People's National Party, and then through the West Indies Federation, independence, the 2 Michael Manley governments and so on. And really I was trying to write something fictional about that. Then you think, well, what do you know about? You know, how it's got to be a story if it's going to be fiction. And then I thought of my father, and I thought of the strange life that we used to have down in Chinatown. And as an adult, I tried to imagine what my father was up to. So I kind of decided what I thought he was up to, putting together the tiny pieces of memory as I had as a child of our life. The police coming to dinner, you know, wandering through Chinatown where everybody's very happy to see you, all this kind of stuff, which as a child you don't really think anything of, but something was happening. When my mother read the draft of Powell, she said, yes, I can see where you got the idea. But your father wasn't anywhere near as clever, or as successful, or as funny. So I had my early life that I created. So Powell was sort of a constructed memory of my father, an invented memory of my father. I had my mum, I was calling her afternoon, so 3 p.m, I'd call her and I'd go, question. And she'd go, oh, yes, what? Well, in the war, obviously Jamaica wasn't in the war, but you must have had shortages. What shortages did you have? So it's rice and gasoline. And so there's these 2 scenes in Powell about what they did about the rice. I mean, she told me wrong, though, you see, because she told me, the first time she told me, she said there was a guy that used to come and knock on people's door at 3 o'clock in the morning and sell the rice, and the rice had all these brown bits in it. And so I put that in the book. But then later on, she told me, after the book was published, she told me that wasn't right. What he used to do, he didn't knock on their door. He used to come down the road at 3 o'clock in the morning with like one of those big school bells, and he'd ring the bell and he'd shout, I got the rice, if you want it, you better get out your bed and come get it. And actually, if I'd written that in the book, that would have been much better. But I had my mum, and I spent a lot of time. I spent a lot of time in Jamaica, just soaking it up. That I've stopped.
Yeah, okay.
I know you have 2 more, you see.
Yes, I have 2 more questions. You read to us from both Power and Gloria, and one of the things that struck me is the very different voices that you use, both very powerful. Could you talk to us a little bit about your use of language in the novels?
Well, this is a funny thing. I always used to think the writers who said their characters spoke to them were a little bit off the page. And I just thought, oh, don't be so, this is ridiculous. So I always thought that I had written 4 versions of Pow in standard English before I was sitting on a veranda in Jamaica. And by the 4th version now, Pow and I both know the story, okay? So I'm sitting on a veranda in Jamaica in a hotel. And my room was being cleaned, and I couldn't be bothered to go and get the laptop out the safe. So I decided to just get a notebook and start writing like this. And I started writing, and he started talking to me. He started. Me and the boys were sitting in the shop. My mother was appalled. She said, "You can't. That's not proper English grammar. How can you start a book?" Me and the boys was anyway. He started. Me and the boys were sitting in the shop talking about how good business was, and it just came to me. I think it was probably my father's voice, remembered or imagined or whatever. It just came to me, and he then dictated the book. Because I already knew, we'd written that 4 times, we knew what happened. In actual fact, when he starts, me and the boys are sitting in the shop, was actually my chapter 5. So if Pow wants to start there, we'll start there, and then we'll just, fit it all in. So once that happened, then it flowed. And I knew, I kept rewriting it because I knew it was wrong. There was something wrong about it, and it was the voice. So once he started writing, then it flowed, and I think because it turned out it was really funny because I really struggled with voice, and it turns out now that voice and dialogue are 2 of the things that I'm said to be really, really good at. Maybe because I struggled with it so much. So he dictated Pow, basically, and I had to try to keep up and also to change it a little bit because I couldn't have written 100,000 words in proper Jamaican patois and nobody would want to read that. So it's written that it's the rhythm of it rather than when you see it on the page, it sounds the way it sounds when I read it, but when you see it on the page, you'll see that most of the words are actually just ordinary standard English words. It's just the rhythm of it because the way the sentence is constructed. So if you take something like, he doesn't say the blue dress was tight. Yeah, he says, they must have sewed up with her already inside of it. It's a tight. So it's a sentence is backwards, and it's the way Jamaicans talk. So what I was trying to do was to get the rhythm of it. And every now and again I sling in a wid and dem and a thing. So you get that flavour. But I didn't want it to be difficult to read. And my mum wasn't sure. She said, are you sure that white people are going to be able to read this? And I was like, well, all the editors down in Bloomsbury, they're all white. And they seem to like it. They're going to buy it, so I think it's going to be okay. So, and it has it. People say that they open it or they hear me and they think, ooh, oh my God, what on earth is happening here? But by the first page, once you let yourself get into the rhythm, it's easy. And then some people said to me that at the end of the book, they find they're talking like that. So halfway through the book, they're now saying, I'll go and start reading this now because I've got to go put the pot on for the dinner. So, it's like, so now there's all these Jamaican-speaking people in this tiny little Leicestershire village that I live in.
And what about Gloria's voice? Did she speak to you as well?
Yeah, Gloria just came straight. Gloria just came straight to me. She when we were getting towards the end of Pow being done, and then Bloomsbury said, well, what we're going to do. I wrote the first chapter of Gloria then, and then that sat for months actually while we finished up work on Pow and all of that. So then when I came to write the second chapter of Gloria, I thought, what am I going to write now? Because she told me that first chapter and then she hadn't told me anything for quite a few months. So I got very, very scared. But then she did manage to tell me the rest, which is about 110,000 words. So I thought she did okay. She did all right. But again, you see, I kind of with myself had established a principle of just to let them tell me and not to get in my own way. I think that was the thing I was trying. And the handwriting, as opposed to the over-editing, I would sit on a thing and I'd write 3 sentences and I could edit those 3 sentences all day. Whereas with the handwriting, so just like 500 words a day, getting blood out of a stone, 2,000-3,000 words. So I wasn't over-editing. And that's what I mean about not getting in my own way. I just let them tell me. Most of the time, I had no idea what was going to happen. So I just said, well, this is the chapter in which the daughter gets married, so this is the chapter about the wedding. And then I'd start writing that chapter, and I had no idea what happened at the wedding until Pao told me what happened at the wedding. And I'd be like, oh, really? Is that what? Really? Did he really say that? I mean, it kind of overtook my life. I'd start laughing in the middle of dinner, and people would say, what are you laughing at? And I'd like, it's just what Pao said. That's just really funny what he said to me. And so I had to carry a notebook everywhere and write everything down, because they're constantly talking to me, which I shouldn't have said that in public, because there's places where people are put who say things like that.
You said to me that you've just finished your 3rd novel, which is written from the perspective of Pao's wife, Faye. Did you always envisage this as a trilogy centering around the same story but offering 3 different takes on life in Jamaica?
Well, it was so yes and no. When I started, as I said, it was a story of Jamaica. And I wanted to explain, because lots of people who, in the UK certainly, who've heard of Jamaica, all they hear about is how we all just go run around shooting each other. And I wanted to explain why it was some of the trouble that we have. And to go back, there was one point when, after Bloomsbury bought Pao, they were thinking maybe they'd change the name, and they sent me an email saying, we're thinking we might change the name. Have you ever had any other working titles? And so, tongue-in-cheek, as you can on an email, I wrote, yes, I did actually. It was called A Social and Political History of Jamaica, from British colonialism to American fiscal policy in the Caribbean. They came back and they said, we think we'll call it Pao. So I said, okay, fine. So really what it was that I was trying to tell that story. And I was trying to say, there's a reason why the poverty in Jamaica, there's a reason why the violence in Jamaica, there's a reason why because of Jamaica's geography being 90 miles off the Miami coast, and what the CIA brought the guns and the British took all the money from the plantations, and now the Americans. So it was that story, and trying to say, and if you're black, because of the colour system that British colonialism over 300 years set up, you had the African heritage people who got thrown off the plantation, who'd never had any education and never got any. Okay? And while they were absent in the mountains trying to make a living, the British then brought in the Chinese and Indian indentured workers, so that when they realized they couldn't make a living in the mountains and came back, the jobs were gone. Right? So then they go to West Kingston, and so the slums of West Kingston, Trenchtown, Denhamtown, Jonestown, these places build up. Right? And so at the bottom of the kind of stratified society that the British create for their own comfort is all the ex-descended slaves' African heritage. And then above that you have the Indians who were busy growing the vegetables after they came off their contracts on the plantations. Then you have the Chinese. Then you have the very rich Chinese who came in as shopkeepers. And then you have the mulatto offspring of the Welsh and Scottish overseers who were brought, right? And then you have the plantation owners and the offspring and so on. And so you have that. So I wanted to show how that colour system got created by British rule, and what the consequence of that was. So that's why Gloria's African heritage, and she lives in a different Jamaica from the Jamaica that Faye lives in, who's light-skinned, rich Chinese, it's a completely different island. They have completely different experiences. So the books were about trying to do that, and it made sense to try to do that through the different perspectives, telling the different stories that are completely different stories, and that's why they can be read in any order.
Thank you. I'm very much looking forward to reading Faye. Is it coming out in May?
Spring,
In the spring.
spring next year.
Spring next year.
Yeah.
Now we'll move on to James Scudamore, who's the author of 3 novels. His work is very international in scope. His first novel, The Amnesia Clinic, is set in Ecuador, while his second novel, Heliopolis, is based in Brazil. But today, James will be reading from his third novel, Reeking, set in a derelict psychiatric hospital on the English coast. Narrated by 3 characters remembering their shared past, Reeking is an intricate, labyrinthine novel about the opiate power of place, the fragility of sanity, and the fickle nature of memory. James.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to read a section of the novel that's about 2 young boys, well, boys of 17, so not that young, actually. And Roland is the sort of main character here, and his best friend is called Oliver. Roland is a sort of huge, hulking, awkward boy whose mother used to work at Reeking, the psychiatric hospital, which is now derelict in the aftermath of the Care in the Community Act, which, if you don't know, was an act of government passed in the UK in the mid-90s, which closed down all of the old Victorian psychiatric hospitals. So the hospital is this huge, sprawling ruin on the outskirts of the town, and in many ways it's the main character of the novel. It sort of colours everything. And in this extract, Roland and Oliver are just on an excursion to go and shoot some chickens at a nearby broiler house near to Oliver's family farm. And they're remembering some of the wild parties that they used to have in the psychiatric hospital just after it closed. Oh, I should mention as well, there are 2 other characters named. One is Mona, who is Roland's mother, who is a psychiatric nurse, who now runs a small care home on the seafront for former patients of the hospital. And the other one is someone called Carol, who is one of her patients. Oliver has promised to make good on his offer of chickens, so Roland goes off to meet him, leaving the 2 of them sitting there, Carol sitting quietly at her jigsaw table, Mona sucking her teeth at a page of the newspaper headlined, "My boy is gone and I'll never get him back." He wraps himself up, takes the bus out of town, gets off at a stop flanked by ridged fields, and walks the half-mile track to Oliver's house. It's understood now that Roland will not enter the yard, not even to ring the front doorbell, so he waits outside, staring at lichen on the dry stone walls, waiting to be noticed. The air is cold and filled with the tang of muck. After 5 minutes, he hears a door closed, then quick footsteps in the slop of the yard, and Oliver comes out through the gate looking businesslike and touches Roland briefly on the arm by way of greeting and apology. Soon they are walking up the shoulder of the broiler house hill, the leather of Oliver's rifle strap creaking at his shoulder. They climb, 2 dark shapes against the sky, braced against life with low expectations and no contingency plans. They approach the barbed wire fence that marks the end of Oliver's family farm and the perimeter of the broiler house. "How's your dad?" says Roland, referring to the fact that he still isn't supposed to go anywhere near the house. "Doing okay, I think. Still not quite right. He hasn't seen Oliver's father since he stopped by the farm the morning after a late summer thunderstorm last year to find a house in mourning. Oliver's mother was in a back room with the television on silent doing needlework while his father sat at the kitchen table with a long, dirty tumbler and a bottle of cooking brandy, staring into the stove and weeping. His prize bull and 9 cows had been sheltering from the storm under the broad canopy of a holm oak when the lightning struck. The electricity was conducted directly into the puddle of water in which they stood and in which their smoking bodies were found. He'd been drinking ever since, in a reaction both Roland and Oliver thought was over the top, but they knew him well enough to know that they should stay out of his way. The 2 of them sat, trying to talk, trying not to raise their voices over the ticking of the coal stove and his father's soft sobs, but they were not quiet enough. And at a certain point, when the boys were laughing too hard at some stupid school story, Oliver's father dashed his brandy glass against the wall with one swift sweep of his arm. He carried on, staring straight ahead, tear trails shining in the stubble of his cheeks, but Roland knew it was time to leave. "Next time I'll come to you," said Oliver, showing him to the door, and they had to stifle Bonker's inappropriate laughter. Their breathing rings out against the cold, hard ground. "So you're still taking Carol for walks up to the hospital," says Oliver. "It's a big deal for her. She can't go on her own. I leave her alone when we're there, then I meet up with her and walk her down again. What do you do when she's away on her own? I don't know, just walk around. He doesn't like that Oliver knows he still goes up to reeking. The place is old hat now. But it's not as fun as it used to be. We were the lucky ones there. Oliver is talking with a nostalgia he has learnt from older kids about the parties. That first summer 2 years ago, straight after the closure, has acquired legendary status. People are already lying about having been there. And it's true, the parties were good. The building seemed inexhaustible, and so did the summer. They were 15 and just finding out about the good stuff. The hospital was still full of its furniture, and it wasn't even fenced off. It felt like it had been vacated for their benefit, with interesting things left deliberately for them to find in every single room. They marched on it, the young of the town, as if it were the palace of a deposed dictator, and they wanted to show that they no longer feared it. They were tentative to start with, but they got bold quickly enough. He remembers people daubing what they thought were satanic slogans on trees and walls, wearing straitjackets, seeking out the morgue. He remembers the first fires being set and kids dancing round them to the music and the wave of panic when the floorboards burned through for the first time. Remember the bathing chair, says Oliver, breathing hard against the gradient of the hill. You were nobody if you hadn't had a go in the bathing chair. You were strapped in by the restraints on its arms and legs, and people poured booze into your mouth until you'd had enough. And what about that girl, Claire something? Remember her? Not sure, says Roland. He remembers her well. He will remember her for years. She was older than them, maybe 17, surging round from group to group in Doc Martens and a wide-brimmed hat, drinking Southern Comfort and making it known that if anyone told her they had never been kissed, then she would rectify the problem. Roland was one of the first people she approached, but would never have dreamed of making such a declaration, so he had turned to Oliver, who, unlike Roland, was no stranger to kissing all manner of people, and he had put on his sweetest grin, batted his eyelashes, and said that he was untouched. By the light of the fire, he watched Oliver taking one long, drunken snog, converting it to another, and then capitalizing further on the situation. This is his way. You make one audacious move, then use it to advance your cause before anyone gets wind of your determination. He watched Oliver suggesting something to her and her laughing, and the two of them disappearing towards the old assembly hall stage. Then, cursing Oliver for having dosed him up with drugs just before abandoning him, Roland stormed off to find more drink. He remembers his heart belting with the speed Oliver had made him take, the gritted teeth intensity as he looked down from a balcony at the mob rioting in the hall. They were right down in the throat of the music, where it was at its most penetrating and abrasive. The sound filled the chamber with harsh echoes. Bigger fires were being set. He assumed when he first saw it that Oliver would be at the center of the group, piling up the chairs and tables to be torched, that the party had reached that stage because of him and his destabilizing energy. But when he scanned the crowd, there was no sign of his tiny, dangerous form. Instead, Roland saw that he was leaning up near the stage behind a load of stacked metal chairs near some old scenery with the girl. Her legs were apart and he had a hand up her skirt. Before Roland turned away for the last time, he remembers being surprised by the tenderness with which Oliver seemed to be operating, for all that any observer could have seen that his objective was just to steal whatever he could get away with. Oliver was no tourist. He was here undercover to topple the regime. And then savage energy kicked in and self-hatred that Roland could have been stupid enough not to tell her the truth, because if he had, he could have been him getting the goods down there. And he sat on the balcony talking to himself with his teeth gritted, saying, let it go, let it go, let it go, but knowing that the more he obsessed about it, the more it would be impossible to let it go at all. And all the while, look, could you fucking believe him down there, surging onto third base? He turned in disgust and left the back of the gallery through the little hut that contained the old movie projection room. He sifted through the rolls of film for a while, then made his way outside down a precariously corroding set of waffled metal steps. He walked down a long sealed corridor outside the building but connected to it. He found a window board on a distant wing that hadn't been touched and levered it easily away from its shattered panes, screws protesting in the chipboard. He ducked inside and pulled his sleeves over his hands to climb over the broken glass on the ledge. He crossed a square room lined with green metal bedsteads, then found himself in a blue carpeted corridor. He passed a record office stacked with a huge wall of index cards, and then he heard it, the calm sound of someone whistling an absent-minded tune coming from somewhere inside the building. He went further in, the building soaking around him as the party's noise fell away. He carried on, his footsteps crunching on broken glass, following the whistled tune. He opened the door to a bathroom where a dove sat on a partition between two toilet cubicles, cooing. Still, the whistling carried on next door. He pushed open the door to find an old man with wild white hair, sitting next to an unmade bed and painting a picture. Beside him were chocolate bars and a large bottle of lemonade. Leaning against the wall were a broom whose bristles were worn almost to nothing and a garden fork with only 2 tines. How long had this relic of a man been living here? It was Roland's first meeting with Geoffrey the gardener. The staff at Reeking had done a good job of keeping him busy, put him to work not only in the gardens but in the kitchens and corridors as well. He was so well integrated that when the hospital closed down, it was just assumed that he would find work elsewhere. It went completely overlooked that his official status was that of patient. When Roland found him, he'd been living there for nearly a year, taking his fork and his brush out to the gardens every day, awaiting further instructions. He came to live at the Golden Sands after that, only to die 7 months later from what Carol described as underuse. She wasn't upset, though. She waited until after Geoffrey's funeral to mention it, but she claimed that he'd pestered her at night throughout his time with them, but that she hadn't wanted to say anything to get him into trouble. Still, she said, after the time he had of it, it's no surprise. She went on to explain how Geoffrey had been difficult with the opposite sex ever since his original admittance to Reeking, which was caused by a fight he'd got into with the man who was sleeping with his wife when he came back home. Came back home from where? Said Roland. The war, of course, said Carol. They reached the outskirts of the broiler house, 2 long barns with a pair of grain silos at each end. Oliver motions for them to lie down on their fronts near the hedge. What time are they coming? Says Roland. Round 5 this time of year. And you know it's today. Of course I know it's today. They lie there, getting cold. The wind carries the smell of ammonia and the sound of muffled indignation. Oliver taps Roland on the shoulder and jerks his head towards the driveway where a red pickup is arriving. It backs up to the entrance and 2 men in donkey jackets get out. The back of the truck is stacked high with identical wooden crates. Roland can't hear exactly what they're saying, but he can hear the intonation of a joke and brief chuckles. The men put on thick gloves and clamber over their truck and into the broiler house. The simmering sound of 5,000 chickens comes to the boil. Phase 1 in progress, says Oliver. Do we go in now? No, phase 1 is when the chicken catchers are here. We move at phase 2, which is when they've gone. It's cold lying down here. You want free stuff, you have to pay for it somehow. Oliver settles himself and takes the air rifle out of its slip. Here. What? I bet you can't hit one after a whack on this. Roland looks down to see a familiar little brown bottle with a lightning flash label. He sighs. Really? Got to keep things interesting. It's a cold afternoon and the poppers make it colder. After the first deep hit of the fumes, Roland is staring uselessly at a patch of ground as his head swells with blood. Then comes hard, gut-shaking laughter tinged with desperation because they're laughing for no reason but still can't stop, and fear that if they did stop there would be nothing but a headache and the sadness, the beautiful toxicity of it, the swimming pool soak of those fumes that swell your brain to bursting point. The chicken catchers work fast, grabbing 4 or 5 at a time by their necks and stuffing them into the wooden crates they carry before slamming the lids. It isn't long before they're getting up and driving away, and sure enough, though they've locked the doors behind them, the men have been clumsy, and several birds can be glimpsed pecking around in the scrub by the shed. When the van's lights have safely receded up the bumpy track, Oliver gets busy. He breaks the barrel of the air rifle and inserts one of the pellets from the tin in his lap. The gun makes a dull tapping noise and the pellet hits home. A stringy stalk of cow parsley wavers nearby, and the chicken drops into a flapping mess in the dirt. Oliver leans back to reload. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much, James. On your website, there's a trailer for the book for Reeking. It's a highly evocative short film of an abandoned building, presumably the derelict asylum that's at the heart of this novel. Is the novel about a real place or an imaginary one? And did you visit hospitals or similar buildings? I was just wondering what kind of research you carried out.
It was quite guerrilla research, really. The idea for the novel has quite a dry starting point in that it was inspired by a piece of legislation about the Care in the Community Act. But then I became aware of how many asylums were still derelict and how it was possible to get into them. And I think I visited my first one in around September 2009, which was somewhere near Hastings, called Hellingley. They all have the most, it's actually pronounced Hellingly, but they all have the most incredible sort of hammer horror gifts of names, like Hellingley, or there's another one in Colchester which is called Severalls. And so those were the main two. In the end, I think I ended up visiting 4 or 5 at various different times, and a couple more than once, and it became a bit of an obsession. Just getting which could be easy or could be difficult, and could involve just slipping in through a gap in a fence, or might at times involve digging a hole, or taking a bit of carpet to throw over some palings, or there are people you can find who can give you clues about how to get into such places. And I think I realized that my sort of interest had reached dangerously sort of addictive proportions when I found myself digging sort of stuck halfway under a palisade fence in a little hole that I dug with a trowel at about 5 o'clock in the morning to try to evade security patrols, and then ended up spending 12 hours inside a building that was totally derelict, without any contact with any other person, or at least any person who was alive. And I just found them increasingly hypnotic places to spend time in. And there is a sort of, I don't know, I can't explain exactly why it is. I think it's probably something akin to the fascination that people felt. I always loved the Washington Irving book, Tales of the Alhambra, which, among other things, tells the story of how, gypsies took up residence in the Alhambra after the peninsula had been reconquered. And I'm always interested in the afterlife of buildings after the sort of the civilization that created them has faded away. And I think that this idea of institutionalizing those who, for whatever reason, we consider to be deviant from normal behavior and need locking up, the fact that that idea only obtained for about 100 years, I find really fascinating. And I think walking around the buildings was as good a way as any of sort of getting close to understanding that. If that makes sense. I mean, the buildings themselves, it's like walking around in a great big metaphor. And they're just very atmospheric as well. And you can see, if you're looking for inspiration for characters and to hear voices and to develop people, there are clues everywhere to the people who lived in these psychiatric hospitals, from their graffiti to their personal possessions to the objects that they were surrounded by on an everyday basis.
Yeah, this novel is narrated by 3 different characters who are offering 3 different perspectives on a shared event, on the same events. Could you talk to us a little about that?
Yeah, it became very much a novel about memory and about the way that we negotiate with our pasts and evolve memories that we can live with. I don't think that memory is immutable. I think that our memories are constantly developing, and we're in a state of constant dialogue with our past and with the things that have happened to us. And I think we do edit our memories. I do think that happens. And I think particularly if someone whom we love has done something to us that we would rather they hadn't done, I think we're capable of editing our memories to make that less painful for us. And so I think, I guess I was really interested in looking at the 3 different perspectives. It's 3 different characters' perspectives on the events leading up to the same accident that culminates in the blinding in one eye of one of the characters. And I was just very interested in looking at the way in which their different versions of those events would conflict with one another and why that might be the case. And then looking at what happens when the characters come together again and are forced to reconcile their memory of the events with that of somebody else who might have evolved a different version from the one that they've been living with all this time. And I think compassion has an important part to play there. I think that sometimes we can lie to ourselves and others for very valid, compassionate reasons.
Throughout the novel, there's a strong sense of loss, with people and their lives reduced to the records left abandoned in the hospital. And some of the characters refer to ECT or electroconvulsive therapy and its effects, which include the loss of language, forgetting the meaning of words. And I was particularly struck by this observation by one of the three characters, Jasper Griffin, and I'm quoting from James here. The hospital itself should be lobotomized, its memories set free, to avenge all who were categorized here. The compost of anguish and torment this place is built on, a geology of sadness. To think people used to worry about the nuclear power station. What about reeking with all its psychic pollution? Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes, that is. I think I always have thought, but I became increasingly convinced, spending time in these buildings, that buildings have memory as much as people do. And I think really it's as simple as that. I think the building remembers the people who've been through it. And given that how much of what went on in psychiatric hospitals was to do with looking at the effects of the past on people, I think I began to be absolutely convinced that the past had an effect on the building. And I think that character and place, they are not always discrete things. I think they very often become part of the same atmosphere. And so the idea of lobotomizing the hospital felt like giving something that one might do to give it a taste of its own medicine. It's sort of, I felt quite, I think that you can probably tell in that quote, I felt perhaps slightly anxious about the idea of making fiction out of the atmosphere of a place that had been the home of so much anguish and torment for so many people over such a long period of time. So I was very conscious of trying to engage with that sort of psychic legacy in a way that wasn't frivolous, in a way that addressed it with care and respect as well as sort of imaginative fascination.
Yeah, and it's a very moving and compassionate novel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I'll... Thank you. Now we'll move on to our third reader this afternoon, who's Kirsty Logan. She writes novels, short fiction and poetry, as well as journalism. And her novel, The Gracekeepers, is about a circus boat in a flooded world and is due out in May. But today she'll be reading to us from her debut book, The Rental Heart and Other Fairy Tales. It's a mix of radical retellings of classic tales and modern-day fables, all exploring lust and loss. Kirsty.
Thank you. I've been reading a lot lately because I've just been recording the audiobook of The Gracekeepers, which, as Kate mentioned, is coming out soon. And we were talking about it at breakfast today, and I remembered that a few times when I was reading just before lunch, we had to stop because the sound of my stomach rumbling was actually audible on the recording. So hopefully that won't happen, but if you hear what appears to be an earthquake, it's me, so don't worry about it. So I'm going to read you the title story from The Rental Heart, which is my debut book, which was out last year, from Salt, which I think is a local press here, which is nice. There is a swear word in it, so if anybody's hiding a small child under their chair or something, just cover their ears. So this is The Rental Heart. The day after I met Grace, her pierced little mouth, her shit-kicker boots, her hands as small as goosebumps, writing numbers on my palm. The day after I met her, I went to the Heart rental place. I hadn't rented in years, and I doubted they would have my preferred model. The window display was different, the Heart's sleeker, and shinier than I remembered. The first time I'd rented, it was considered high tech to have the cogs tucked away. Now, they were as smooth and seamless as a stone. Some of the new hearts had extras I'd never seen, like timers and standby buttons and customized beating patterns. That made me think about Grace, her ear pressed to my sternum, listening to the Morse code of her name, and my own heart started to creep up my throat, so I swallowed it down and went into the shop. An hour later, I was chewing lunch and trying to read the instruction leaflet. They made it seem so complicated, but it wasn't really. The hearts just clipped in, and as long as you remembered to close yourself up tightly, then they could tick away for years, decades probably. The problems came when the hearts got old and scratched. Shreds of past loves got caught in the dents, and they're tricky to rinse out. Even a wire brush won't do it. But the man in the rental place had assured me that this one was factory fresh, clean as a kitten's tongue. Those heart rental guys always lied, but I could tell by the heart's coppery sheen that it hadn't been broken yet. I remembered perfectly well how to fit the heart, but I still read the leaflet to the end as a distraction. A way to not think about how Grace looked when she bit her lip, when she wrote the curls of her number. How she would look later tonight it was very important that I fit the heart before that happened. 10 years ago, first heart. Jacob was as solid and golden as a tilled field, and our love was going to last forever, which at our age meant 6 months. Every time Jacob touched me, I felt my heart thud wetly against my lungs. When I watched him sleep, I felt it clawing up my esophagus. Sometimes it was hard to speak from the wet weight of it sitting at the base of my tongue. I would just smile and wait for him to start talking again. The more I loved him, the heavier my heart felt, until I was walking around with my back bent and my knees cracking from the weight of it. When Jacob left, I felt my heart shatter like a shotgun pellet, shards lodging in my guts. I had to drink every night to wash the shards out. I had to. A year later, I met Anna. She was dreadlocked, green-eyed, full of verbs. She smelled of rain and revolution. I fell. But the parts of me that I wanted to give to Anna were long gone. There was not enough left that was worth giving. The edges of my heart were jagged now, and I did not want to feel those rough edges climbing my throat. I did not love her enough to cough blood. I kept what was left of me close, tucked under the long, soft coils of my intestines where Anna wouldn't see. One night, still throbbing, Anna opened her chest. Her heart nestled, a perfect curl of clockwork. "This is how," she said. I could hear its tick against the soft embrace of her lungs, and I bent close to her to smell its metallic sharpness. I wanted. The next day, she took me to the heart rental place. I spent a long time pressing my palms against the polished metal until I found one that felt warm against my skin. I made sure that the sharp edges of the cogs were tucked inwards, kept away from the just-healed rawness of my throat. Back at Anna's, she unwrapped the plastic, fitted the heart, closed my chest, took me to bed. Later, I watched her sleep and loved her with every cog of my heart. When Anna ran off with my best friend, I took the heart back to the rental place. Nothing choked or shattered or weighed me down. It looked just as sleek shiny as when I had first taken it out of the wrapping, and the rental guy gave me my full deposit back. I deleted Anna's phone number and went out for dinner. The next year, when I met Will, I knew what to do. The heart this time was smaller, more compact, and it clipped into place easily. Technology moves fast. Will taught me about Boadicea, the golden section, musical intervals, Middle English. I soaked him up like I was cotton wool. Sometimes, pre-dawn, I would sneak into the bathroom and open myself to the mirror. The heart reflected will back at me, secure in its mechanics. I would unclip it, watch it tick in my fist, then put it back before sliding into Will's arms. On our first holiday, I beeped through the airport barriers. I showed my heart and was waved on. It wasn't until the plane was taxiing that I realized Will had not beeped. I spent the whole flight wire-jawed with my paperback open to page 1, unable to stop thinking about the contents of Will's chest. We never mentioned it. I couldn't stand to think of his chest cavity all full of wet, red flesh. When I left Will, I returned the heart again. But I couldn't sleep for the thought of his heart, shot into shards, sticking in his guts, scratching up his gullet. After that, I rented hearts for Michael and Rose and Genevieve. They taught me about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and how to look after a sausage dog. They smelled of petrol and hair oil and sawdust and honeysuckle. Soon the heart rental guy started to greet me by name. He gave me a bulk discount, and I got invited to his Christmas party. Soon I found that halfway between sleeping and waking, the glint of the rental guy's gold incisor would flicker at the corners of my eyes. I wondered if he licked the hearts before renting them to me, so molecules of him would be caught down in some tiny hidden cog, merging into my insides. The glint of the rental guy in my dreams started to make me uncomfortable, so I switched to a new rental place. There were plenty to choose from, and I preferred the ones that didn't gleam their teeth at me. They never gave me back my security deposits, but always kept their stares on the scratched glass counter when I returned the hearts. Their downturned eyes were more important than the shine of coins. As I got older, the hearts got smaller. After Genevieve, I moved away for a while to an island where I knew no one and nothing, not even the language. I lived alone. I didn't need to rent a heart. My empty chest made it easy to breathe, and I filled my lungs with the sharp air of the sea. I stayed there for a year. Back in the city, back in the world, among words and faces I knew, one night, many drinks, and Grace's number scrawled tiny on my skin, the sleek, shiny new heart. I swallowed the rest of my lunch and went home to fit the heart. 3 years later, autumn afternoon, curled on the couch with newsprint on my fingers and Grace's dozing hair in my lap. A small notice in the corner of the page. Product recall. Heart model number 34527J. Defective. I pressed my hand, the hand holding the dark length of Grace's hair, against my chest. I hadn't opened myself in years, trusting the tick of the heart. I'd kept it for so long that I knew I'd have lost my deposit, but I hadn't wanted to return it, to lose the image of Grace coiled in the center of it. I slid out from under Grace. She mumbled half awake, then quietened when I slipped a cushion in under the heat of her skull. I tiptoed into the bathroom and opened the rusted hinges of my chest. The heart was dusty and tarnished and utterly empty. In the center of it was no picture of Grace, no strands of her hair, no shine of memories, no declarations. The rusting metal squealed when I pulled it out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. Your collection of stories, as I said, it's a mixture of modern-day fables, such as this one, and also retellings of classic fairy tales. So my first question is, why fairy tales? How important do you think they are in our modern world?
Yeah, I think there's a reason that I and lots of other writers and musicians and filmmakers keep circling back to fairy tales. There's just something about them that speaks to us, and I think will continue to speak to us. The emotions in fairy tales are timeless. A lot of fairy tales are about love and loss and betrayal and sadness and just not understanding why things happen. I think part of the reason that we originally began to tell folk tales and fairy tales is because the world is a confusing place. We don't understand why most of the things that happen, and I think we need stories to try and make sense of them. The reason that I personally keep coming back to them in my writing is that it's so hard to write about big emotions. So for example, heartbreak, being somebody breaking up with you and a relationship ending. Basically your thought is, this sucks. I hate this. This is horrible. I hate this feeling. But if you're just going to write that on a page, it doesn't really kind of connect to someone. Whereas for me, if I could use this kind of mythical fairy tale feel and use a fantastical element, it would properly get the sense across of what I was feeling and what I was trying to say. A lot of the stories in the book I wrote quite soon after my dad died. He died 3 years ago, just very suddenly, kind of out of nowhere. And like most people, I had a fraught relationship with my dad. I loved him very much, but he was a troubled guy. And again, when someone dies, really you're just thinking, this sucks. I wish this wasn't happening. I wish I could see them again. But even to yourself, it's hard to explain that emotion, and it's very hard to explain that emotion to somebody else. Whereas if I could write a story, so there's a story in the book called The Light Eater, which is about someone who's suffered a loss. And so she begins to eat light because the world seems so dark to her. And to me, that was the only way I could really convey how I felt in my grief. I just felt like the world was so dark, and I wanted to bring light into myself somehow. So a lot of the stories are actually quite literal. And with The Rental Heart, literally I thought, this hurts my heart. I want a new one. So I think that's why I keep coming back to it, because fairy tales do that quite often. They use these fantastical or surreal elements to convey something. They're not just kind of plonked in for no reason. They're to convey a particular emotion.
Yeah, your stories do explore love, relationships, intimacy and maternity, focusing on characters who often live on the margins or have alternative lifestyles. And you've also said that the stories are about love substitutes, as indicated by the title of the story you read, The Rental Heart. Could you talk a little bit about that? Yeah,
love's just hard. It's really hard to love someone. Even if, it's a beautiful, safe love, they love you back, you can be together forever. It's still hard. It's really hard to give yourself like that to somebody else. I know the story I read is a romantic sexual love, but I think any kind of love, if it's love for your family, love for your friends, love for your career, love for your life, love for the world, it's hard to, put the barriers down and give a part of yourself away, because there's always that danger. Whatever you are giving yourself to might not give it back. There's a phrase that I really love, which is, after all, nature has never loved us back. Which I think is true. You can love things with every part of you, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get that back. So I think quite often we do use these substitutes, these ways that we can still have love, but kind of put this little safety net, this little barrier in between. But I think, I wrote the book, I've just turned 31, but I wrote this book when I was in my 20s, and I think that was my main lesson I learned in my 20s, is that you can't love somebody like that. You can't have a substitute. You can't rent a heart. You need to just put yourself out there and take the hit if it doesn't happen, or if you lose them. You don't stop loving them. It's just, it's hard to have that love and not be able to kind of feel it back. So, yeah, that was my lesson.
You're writing fairy tales and fables, so there's a strong sense of the imaginary and magic in your stories. But at the same time, there's often a strong sense of place. So I was wondering, are you influenced by any particular landscapes in your writing?
Yeah, Scotland very much. Don't know if you can tell from my accent. It's tiny bit Scottish. But I actually grew up in Cheshire, which was a nice place. But I moved to Glasgow, which is where my family's from, and that's just, as soon as I got there, I thought, oh, I'm home now. And Scotland has always felt like home to me. As soon as I got there, I just felt this intense sense of belonging and of home, and it's so inspirational to me. The cities, but also the more kind of country, the very dramatic landscapes. I love the sea. I always come back to the sea. If I ever get stuck or just a bit lost, or if I ever feel that I'm too big or too small in the world, I get a big head, or I feel like I'm inconsequential, I go to the sea and it puts me right. It makes me realize that, yes, I am inconsequential, but also important to the people who I care about. So that always brings me back. So definitely the sea. Scotland has some of the most beautiful beaches and seas that you could ever see. A lot of people like the kind of beautiful Caribbean white sands, but give me a good grey, dramatic storm. That's what I like. I like a nice rocky beach with a good storm, lots of clouds. Oh, that's what I like. It makes me feel at one with the world. So definitely the landscape of Scotland. Actually, a book, I've just finished my third book, which is another story collection, which was very much inspired by the landscape of Scotland. Last summer I went on a little trip with my girlfriend, who became my fiancée on the trip. She proposed. Oh, thank you. We drove up. If anyone's been to Applecross, which is this beautiful place in Scotland, and to get there you go up this terrifying drive. It's all these hairpin bends, and there's all these warnings. If there's even one snowflake, the whole road's closed, because it's a terrifying drive. So we drove up and up and up and up, and we got right to the top, and there's nobody there. There's just nobody for miles. And we've got a dog, a little lurcher dog, so we let the dog, go on a run. And Annie she kept going on about these cairns, which are little stacks of stones that you make, which they used to be on tombs, but now people make them if they go to a place to kind of show that they've been there. And she'd been making a fuss about this. We need to make a cairn, we need to make a cairn. So I was like, okay, we'll make a cairn. So we did make this cairn, and I turned around to see where the dog was, and I turned back and she'd put the ring on the on the top of the cairn. But so we had this lovely trip. We went to Applecross, and we went to Skye, and we went to Bute, which was actually where my dad was born, but I had never been there before. So that was wonderful, and then this all kind of came together to inspire much more directly, I think, than my previous work. It was very much inspired by place.
That's great. I've got one last question, actually, for all three of you that follows on from our earlier discussion about audiences. Kirsty, you're writing short-form fiction, so you have a range of outlets for your work, from short story collections to anthologies and magazines, but also podcasts, radio broadcasts, to exhibitions in galleries. How important is it to you to reach your readership in these different ways? And do you think that people respond differently to your work when they see it in different places?
Oh, that's a good question. It's never something that I've consciously thought about. I think I just get excited by things. So if I hear about, there's an exhibition or there's a podcast or there's a kind of an audiovisual project, I just get excited and I think, I know what I could do for that. I could do all these different things. So it's not as if I ever at any point sat down and thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to target these different markets so that I can target different readerships. I just get very excited about stories and about sharing stories with people, and about creating these kind of worlds and situations and emotional situations that I can bring people into. So I just get overexcited and try and do everything. I think too, people do respond differently. Not everybody likes to sit down and read a book. I know, shocking, I don't get it myself, but not everybody likes to do that. Some people like to have an audio story, they like to have a digital story, they like a story that's mixed with images. So yeah, I do think that's nice to try and bring stories to people in the way that they like to have them.
And James, just briefly, what was the response of readers to Reeking?
Readers have responded very strongly to Reeking, and I've had some of the most sort of intense letters I've ever received about it. And I think some people, it's a book that's written sort of. It is the product of an obsession. I make no bones about that. And I was sort of determined whilst writing it not to let anything distract me from the poetry of the decay of the building and the way that was going to affect all of the characters in the novel. And some readers really love that, and others, I think, just feel trapped by it. But I would far rather write something like that people react extremely to. It's those that love that enjoy wandering the corridors of the derelict asylum have responded with gratifying levels of intensity.
Has there been an increase in the number of break-ins into
I don't
derelict
know.
hospitals?
There might have been. I don't know. I hope I'm not responsible for that. I have tips if anyone wants to get in on on the difference between breaking and entering and aggravated trespass, which is a very, very important distinction.
It's useful to know. And Kerry, has there been any difference in the response to your work from readers in the UK and readers in Jamaica? Is your work available in Jamaica?
Has there been any difference? I don't know. I mean, the fact that both books have been so well received in terms of the shortlisting for prizes and you know, that sort of thing. And the invitations that I've received here, I mean, to here and to various literature festivals and to do this and to judge this book prize and to do that thing and all of those sorts of things. You realize, although I'm always sort of shocked and surprised, but you have to realize that somewhere these books are being well received. The thing about the Jamaican thing, and that is particularly important to me because I've been away from Jamaica for a long time. And to write these 3 Jamaican books in the voice, that was quite nerve-wracking for me, and I didn't want the Jamaicans to feel that it was a disservice what I'd done. I wanted them to feel proud of being Jamaican. I wanted them to feel that they'd recognize themselves and so on. So that had always been a really important thing to me. And so 3 things I think of. One was I got invited to Jamaica to read at Calabash. And I was so scared, as I often am when I do these things. I was so scared, I was just hanging onto the lectern, hoping I wouldn't fall down before I finished reading. As I finished reading, and I knew I'd got them because when I got to the part, Jamaican audiences can be quite responsive to. When I got to the part, I said, they must have set up with her already inside it so tight. They started laughing, and I knew I'd kind of got that. And as I came down off the stage, I realized when I got to ground level that they were standing up. And when 2,000 people do that, because before I went there, the biggest audience I'd read to was like 50 people. And then suddenly I'm reading to 2,000 people, the buffets behind me, the Caribbean, you know, that kind of stuff, the beach. So that was an amazing moment for me. By the time I'd taken all the photographs, as you do, and walked to the bookshop, which was like where that car is, all the copies of Power had sold out. And then, you know, after that, then I did a couple of live phone and Skype interviews on Jamaican radio. But so those sorts of things have happened. That's exciting. But a couple other things have happened. One of them was I got an email from a woman in America, from Florida, who I don't know, who said, it's 8 o'clock in the morning in Kingston, and I've just had a telephone call from my 82-year-old father. And he said he's just read this book called Power, and it's just like how it was in Barry Street when he's Chinese, just how it was in Barry Street when he was a boy, and he couldn't believe that somebody could have actually captured that. And he was very, very excited. So I rang his daughter in America, and she emailed me. And then the other thing I got just a couple of weeks ago, actually, from this, again, an American woman from Philadelphia. And she said that she'd just been home to a family thing in Westmoreland, which is where Gloria's supposed to be from. And then she'd come back and she'd read Gloria. And she couldn't believe that, you know, that I'd done that I'd captured Westmoreland. And then she said the most amazing thing. She said reading Gloria made her feel proud to be Jamaican. And to me, that's what it's all about. So in terms that for me is like, okay, we got the accent. There was after I finished, sorry, I'm running over. After I finished reading, I was walking through the festival, and this woman came up to me and she said, "So where are you living in Jamaica? You're living in Kingston?" So I said, "No, I'm not. I'm not living in Kingston. I don't live in Jamaica." "You don't live in Jamaica? So where you live in?" I said, I live in England." "You live in England? How long you live in England?" So I said, 45 years. And it's Jamaica. So she said, 45 years you live in England and you still talk like that? I said, "No, I don't talk like that. That's the book. Listen to me." So I felt, so that made me feel, yeah, that's okay. You've gotten away with that.
Thank you very much. Thank you all three of you for sharing such wonderful stories. And could you join me in thanking our panel, Kirsty Logan, James Scudamore and Carrie Young.